Hi, welcome to the Smell Podcast. I'm your host, Katie Boateng. Today, I wanted to focus on congenital anosmia. You all may know by now that I have acquired anosmia from a viral infection that I suffered from, I think back in 2008. I was very, very sick, and after that, I couldn't smell anything anymore. Although I don't have congenital anosmia, I'm very interested in exploring the way that congenital anosmics are impacted by growing up never having had a sense of smell. So this week, I want to share an article with you, which is titled, When the Nose Never Knows, Exploring the Genetics Behind a Missing Sense of Smell. This was written by Roger Chris for the Genetic Literacy Project, and it was published on September 26, 2018, so it's still really recent. So here's the story. Imagine life without odors. Food tastes the same regardless of how congested your nasal passages are or how damaged your nose is. Perfume and other fragrances simply do not exist. There are no mouth-watering aromas, no bad breath or body odor, and no subconscious sense that someone is scared or sick. A missing sense of smell is called anosmia. It can occur as a result of trauma or illness, as described in books like Remembering Smell, A Memoir of Losing and Discovering the Primal Sense, which was written by Bonnie Blodgett, or Season to Taste, How I Lost My Sense of Smell and Found My Way, which was written by Molly Birnbaum. But sometimes the cause of anosmia is genetic and starts at birth. Affected people simply never smell anything, a condition known as congenital anosmia. Not surprisingly, sense of taste is severely impacted, to such an extent that food is mostly about texture. Other effects include missing emotional connections associated with smell and not being able to enjoy the pleasurable aspects of smell, from the scent of lilacs in the spring to the smell of babies' heads. Congenital anosmia is a rare disorder, thought to affect 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 10,000 people. It was previously believed to primarily be a result of genetic disorders like Kallmann syndrome, a form of hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism in which puberty is delayed or absent. And I really hope that I pronounced those words correctly. But recent research has shown that congenital anosmia has a complex molecular basis. In particular, congenital anosmia that occurs in otherwise healthy individuals is known as isolated congenital anosmia and is extremely rare. In some cases, brain MRIs of affected individuals show an absence or severe hypoplasia of the olfactory bulb, but in others, olfactory structures are largely intact. The genetic basis of this disorder is becoming better understood. And as a side note, hypoplasia is when an organ is underdeveloped or incomplete. A study in the European Journal of Human Genetics from late in 2017 involving next-generation sequencing of patients with congenital anosmia found involvement of 6 syndromic common genes in isolated anosmia. This suggests that the gene defects in Kallmann syndrome may also play a role in isolated congenital anosmia because some of the genes that cause Kallmann are also involved in the development of olfactory neurons, nerve cells which are specialized to handle the sense of smell. Okay, so we're about to jump into some super scientific language that's used in the article, so bear with me. I'll do my best to translate what I think it means after I read it. So here we go. A separate study in clinical genetics looking specifically at congenital general anosmia found a rare X-linked missense mutation in the 10M1 or tenurin 1 gene. This, combined with work in Drosophila melanogaster and in mice, points to loss of function mutations in 10M1 as a possible sole cause of congenital general anosmia. Research in Drosophila shows that 10M1 functions in synaptic partner matching between axons of olfactory sensory neurons and target projection neurons, and is involved in synapse organization in the olfactory system. So that's above my head, but what I think that translates to in regular speech is that researchers think they may have identified a gene that may cause congenital anosmia, and that gene is called 10M1. Also, side note, Drosophila melanogaster is a really fancy way to say common fruit fly. Okay, so the next thing that researchers are focusing on in this article is that the NAV1.7 sodium channel gene, SCN98, is implicated. So in the book, Chasing Men on Fire, the story of a search for a pain gene, neuroscientist Stephen Waxman, PhD, writes that NAV1.7 was known to be present in olfactory sensory neurons, which are essential for our sense of smell. And, consistent with this, anosmia, which is loss of the sense of smell, was also observed in these loss-of-function patients who have a mutation in this SCN98 gene, which causes hereditary small fiber neuropathy. So once again, translating that to normal human speech, I think what this means is that some patients who have a certain gene mutation, which causes nerve numbness or weakness, may also suffer with anosmia. All right, so the last bit of this article, it talks about whole exome sequencing and how it has added important information. So, a 2017 study in Nature found that a stop gain mutation in CNGA2 is the cause of isolated congenital anosmia in a large Iranian family. This built on earlier work which was published in Clinical Genetics in 2015, finding a novel X-linked stop mutation in CNGA2 in two brothers who have isolated congenital anosmia. The gene CNGA2 encodes the alpha subunit of a cyclic nucleotide-gated olfactory channel, though its exact role in olfaction remains to be clarified. I think this means that there's a certain gene, the CNGA2, and that congenital anosmia may be present if there's a stop mutation which is present on this gene. So our article continues with, the above genetics demonstrates how complex the sense of smell is. Genes are involved in the formation and function of the olfactory bulb in the brain and sensory neurons in the nose. Mutations in any of these genes are now thought to be possible explanations for congenital anosmia. This presents a challenge in clinical medicine. After more probable causes of apparent congenital anosmia are eliminated, in particular early life trauma or illness, the list of possible genetic causes is still long. Ruling out disorders like Kalman syndrome is important, but that still leaves distinguishing between isolated congenital anosmia and various rare disorders that are more complicated. For instance, Refsum disease presents with anosmia, but also includes retinitis pigmentosa, progressive muscle wasting, arrhythmias, and neurological manifestations. Refsum disease is an inborn error of metabolism that causes an overaccumulation of phytanic acid, leading to a variety of progressively severe neurological manifestations. Treatment involves a phytanic acid-restricted diet and possibly plasmapheresis. Although this does not restore a sense of smell, it does greatly improve quality of life, making early diagnosis important. Side note, I didn't know what plasmapheresis meant, so thank you, Google. I went and I found out. Plasmapheresis is a process that filters the blood and removes harmful antibodies. It's a procedure which is done similarly to dialysis. However, it specifically removes antibodies from the plasma portion of the blood. So the article concludes with the following. Anosmia is about far more than not being able to smell the roses. An absent sense of smell from birth is almost always genetic and can be an early sign of a serious disease or disorder. Or it can be isolated, a result of a single failure in a complex system that is far more vulnerable than generally recognized. If you yourself would like to explore this article, I will make sure that I include a link to it in the show notes so that you can go and find it. So a big thank you to Roger and the Genetic Literacy Project for allowing me to read your article on the show. Roger Chris is a technical consultant in Washington State, where he specializes in mathematics and research. If you'd like to read other articles which have been written by Roger, you can visit his author profile on the Genetic Literacy website, and I'll include the link to that in the episode description as well. Do any of you listeners have Kalman syndrome or Refsum disease? Have you ever even heard of these before? I hadn't, but now that I have, I'm interested in learning more about them. So again, if you have a story that you'd like to share, or if you would like to be interviewed for the podcast, please send me an email at thesmellpodcast@gmail.com. You can always follow the podcast on Twitter at thesmellpodcast. And that was a super science-heavy episode, so I hope that you come back for next time. And until then, have a great day.